Alrighty, here is the third iteration of my double roller cotton gin. As you can see, I have made some noticeable improvements. This is the second prototype. This is the one that came after the hand crank. I still have the hand crank, and this isn't complete yet, but this is... The parts you see here are mostly complete. So this is just the first step in documenting the process. You see, the first improvement I've made is I replaced the axles with 1/2-inch steel axles. And in order to get these rollers more concentric, you can't see it in there, but I just basically took a 3/4-inch dowel, jammed it in either end, and then perfectly centered and drilled a 1/2-inch hole through the middle of those. And I'll need to glue or epoxy these handles in and the bushings in and all that jazz. We'll get to that eventually, but I'm not there yet. And I basically just reconstructed the same base that I had in my proof of concept with additional parts. Up here is the new tensioning system. It actually does tension, but I'll have to work out a bracket for this because when I tension it now, it just sort of flexes this up, which was to be expected, but I did not have the brackets on hand to do it. So we will make a little bracket for either side. One obvious new addition here on the back is the addition of a stationary knife, or as I'm calling it, a lap board, which prevents cotton coming through the gin from lapping around on the roller. So this stationary knife catches it and then peels it off. And this will have to be covered in tape or something like that because it's rough. If everything works out, this will be the final design that I'm using at the end of the year to gin this season's cotton. This won't be my final iteration, but as it stands, this is going to be the actual functional model. I'm going to continue modifying this until it works to some level of standards that I'm willing to accept. And just to show you that it does work, I'm going to use this electric drill here to power it. As you can see, the tolerances aren't as tight as I would like. There's maybe a 1/16 of an inch at most between there. Whenever I add gears, that's going to get worse, so I'm really going to have to get this tensioning system worked out. I still need to do some dremeling out in the center of these columns to give this a lot more slop. Because at the moment, neither of these have much in the way of vertical slop. And since these are not perfectly centered, there's about probably a 1/16 of an inch or 3/64 maybe of, 3/32 of slop between the concentricity of these two rollers. So I have to have some amount of slop in here in order for that to compensate. And I'm going to have the tensioners properly dialed in order to make up for that. Really, this slop, though, although it's not to my standards of liking, that's probably sufficient for ginning cotton because it just has to not crush the seeds. We'll see. Next step is probably going to be adding pairs of gears on either side and then getting a set of sheaves. And once I have some sheaves and some gears, I will affix this to the treadle and start working on the pulley. And once I have all of that up and running and functional, hopefully I won't already have cotton in hand that I have to start ginning. Hopefully I'll still have a little bit more time to work on it. And then I will be able to fiddle around with this stuff some more. I've got to work out the RPMs I want because that's going to determine the diameter sheaves I'm going to need. I think historically they were shooting for like 150 RPM or something like that. So that's like what, two revolutions a second? So I can get that treadle going pretty good. So I may be able to make do with an 8-inch sheave. That may just be what I'm going with. We'll see. Currently, the biggest issue I'm having is getting gears that are the correct size. I think I'm going with a 1-mod 50-tooth metric gear. That's going to come with a 12mm bore, and I'm going to have to drill that out to a 1/2 inch in order to get it to fit onto here because they don't... It's impossible to find imperial-sized gears. And that should be just right to give me tooth interaction. I would much rather have a 2-mod gear in there, but the only thing I can find in the correct side, the only 2-mod 25 tooth I can find are paired differential gears, which actually might be good for this because having two diagonal gears interfacing right here gives me way more vertical slop in the gears, which would be nice rather than having flat spur gears, but it will also cause the rollers to push apart. But I guess if I pair them counter to each other, that won't be too much of an issue. So we'll see. Those paired gears cost about 50% more than the spur gears. So the Cotton Gin Prototype Mark II is finally complete. Well, almost sort of finally complete. Complete as it's going to get for the time being. So as you can see, the most notable improvements I've made is I've replaced the screws on the tensioning system, and I have this here. This is just a body hub spacer with socket jammed in it, and I use that to tighten these bolts as necessary to put tension on the rollers. And also with this tensioning system, I did add brackets, and those are just held on by one screw down here on either side, and that just keeps this top board in place. Keeps that from peeling up. It's not perfect, but it does what it needs to do, and it adds a little bit of spring tension onto the whole system, which is good because that helps alleviate some of the slop. However, one thing I miscalculated is I bought gears, and as you might be able to make out in there, as you can see right there is a significant gap between the rollers, and that's because I initially thought I had bought the wrong size gears, but it turns out the rollers are just in no way, shape, and form 2 inches in diameter like I thought. They're like 1 in 31/32, so it all adds up to being not quite the right size. So I'm having some custom made, hopefully soon, and those will replace the rollers that are on there. The other additions, as you saw, are these gears. These are Mod 150T. They're 52 millimeters in diameter, which comes out to almost exactly 2 inches in pitch diameter. So that's why I'm using those. And I've got a set of BK80 sheaves, and these have a 5/8 bore because that is the smallest size I could find in this size. So I've got a 5/8 to 1/2 inch bushing in there. And on this side, I actually have a zinc pulley in addition because I bought this one initially just to test everything out before I put in the cash for the big rollers, but it turns out that this zinc one is actually more expensive than one of the steel ones. I finally found a distributor who had the correct size and weight ones. The only thing that was hanging me up is I wasn't looking for I was only looking for a 1/2 inch bore. So once I started including 5/8 with the intent of putting in bushings, I was able to find some stuff in a really good price range. So it behooved me to just buy 2 more of those rather than buying 1 more of these. And so I still have that on there because, as you can see, I do have a belt now. This is an 81-inch V-belt, and that is the exact perfect spacing for this zinc flywheel. However, it's about an inch too small when I put it in the steel flywheel, so I just left the zinc one on there. It had a little more weight to it anyway, so it won't make too much of a difference. And everything's mounted onto the baseboard, and it's all mounted onto the treadle. And I don't know if I'll be able to get this going, but it does work. It is incredibly stiff, there's a lot of resistance, and it's not properly balanced, and I'm hoping that's all due to the lack of concentricity and the fact that this treadle is like 100 years old and rusty, and all it has on it is some 3-in-1 oil instead of actual grease. So I'm going to see if I can show you this thing working. And this is a lot more difficult than it appears because it takes about 150 pounds of force. Maybe not that much, maybe 120 pounds of force to get this thing going when it decides to stop. And so it is very hard to keep this going. And the treadle really wants to go the other direction. That's just how it's balanced. So that's a pain in the ass. It takes 2 foot, really. Alrighty. I think once I get some properly spaced rollers on there and pull apart this treadle, sandblast it, paint it, and grease all of the bearing points, I think it should run a whole heck of a lot better. I'm also going to buy another set of gears to put on this side, because although they're not necessary for interlinking the rollers, there's like a slight angle on this whole setup and the weight distribution on the axles or something like that. I'm not an engineer, but this axle wants to walk this way, like 1/10 of a millimeter every turn. So eventually this will just walk out here until the gears stop interlinking, and then this axle starts smacking into the back of the flywheel, and this pulley or this belt starts cutting against the edge of the baseboard. So that's an annoyance. One other hang up is that this V-belt is not the correct size for a sewing machine, as can be implied, so there's a pretty significant limp. None of that's showing up. I'm well aware of that, and I'm sorry, but not much I can really do down here. But this V-belt's only sitting like 1/3 of the way into that pulley. So that's another concern. I may just have to build my own treadle system out of wood and see how that works, but there's so much mass being thrown around in here, I don't have high hopes for that. But we'll see how it is. I think so far this is a rousing success. This has gone a little bit better than I expected. I'm Tom. This is my second Cotton Gin prototype, and I am quite pleased with how it is working. And shortly in the future it will be upgraded significantly. I'll be adding another set of gears. I just purchased those. They'll get here probably in a month. And I will be replacing the rollers with some concentric handmade ones. I've got an acquaintance who's helping me with textile testing for the cotton, and she's got a friend who has a lathe and does woodworking and likes the interesting projects she brings him. So he should hopefully be making me a set of rollers, which would be absolutely fantastic. That will save me a whole deal of headache. So I'm hoping on that. That's what I'm banking on. Till then, Tom out.